Story 1. Last summer, I was looking for a car on Craigslist. I had been driving a very old car for the past 2 years, and it was starting to have problems. So I took it to a mechanic and found it needed a lot of repairs. At which point, it was no longer worth it. Luckily, I had some savings and I put the car up for sale. I bought cars on Craigslist all the time. I was able to buy a used car from another person and get a very good deal. I was looking for another used car, obviously newer and more reliable than my old one. After searching for a few days and borrowing my parents' old car, I found one that was really good and at a good price. It was a 2010 Subaru Forester for sale at a very reasonable price. I knew this car would sell very quickly, and when I saw that it was a new listing, I immediately responded to it. I contacted the seller. I knew that many people would be in the same boat and would want to see the car as soon as possible. I wanted to see the car as soon as possible. After a while, the salesman contacted me and said he could show me the car tonight after work. He said he would meet me in the supermarket parking lot near his house. Around 8 p.m., the man said he would be at that location in an hour. I drove to the address he sent me and arrived a few minutes later. It was a pretty big supermarket parking lot, but the store was closed. The parking lot was completely empty, except for me. I texted the salesman and let him know I was coming. He replied that he would be there within 5 minutes. After a while, I saw a car pull into the parking lot, but it wasn't a Subaru Forester. Instead, it looked like a plain white car. I thought it must have been someone else. However, the car was parked in the spot next to mine. Then I saw a young-looking man, get out of the car. He walked over to my car. I opened the door and got out. The man held out his hand to me and introduced himself as Al. I introduced myself to him. He then asked if I wanted to see the car. He looked at a white Ford Fusion type car that looked nothing like the green Subaru Forester I was going to see. I told the man I thought he was selling a Subaru Forester. The man looked at me for a few seconds, then started laughing and getting nervous. Then he apologized and said he was selling a totally different car and he was just in the wrong place. Then he pulled out his cell phone and started looking through it. From the corner of my eye, I saw someone's head slowly rise up in the back seat of his car. I could only see the top half of his head, his eyes looking at me, and then he quickly lowered his head. It was strange, like someone was hiding behind my back. I could only see the top half of his head. He looked like a grown man. I looked at my cell phone. I asked him who was in the car. He said, "Nobody. I'm here alone." I said it looked like someone was in the back seat of his car. He then said he saw that I was responding to an ad for a Subaru Forester, not a Ford Fusion. He then apologized for the confusion. I asked him if he was a dealer, to which he said he was not. He was just selling a couple of cars now. I was feeling strange at this time, and being in a quiet parking lot at night was not conducive to that, so he asked me if I was interested. I asked him if he was interested. He started trying to sell me cars and said he would give me a great deal and that I could take a test drive. But that wasn't what I was looking for, so I told him no thanks. Then I told him again that I was sure I saw someone in the back seat. Then I walked over to his car and went inside. I saw him looking in the back seat, but he rolled down the passenger window and told me, "I don't see anybody," and drove away without saying anything else. Then I got back in the car and drove home. When I got home, I couldn't understand how strange this situation was. It seemed very suspicious to me, as if he was hiding something, but I didn't know what was going on. When I went back to the Craigslist ad again, he was gone. The next day, I decided to tell the whole story on Craigslist. To this day, I don't know who the man in the back of the car was, or if it was set up to attack me. I don't know, but it seems to me that this man had more than one list, and if he was planning to rob me or something, I think he was going to do it to more than one person. Story 2. When I was 15 years old, I was looking for a new PlayStation on Craigslist. I'd heard Craigslist was a questionable place, but it was the cheapest place I knew to buy a game console. I managed to get my hands on one of them. The first 4 consoles had broken a few days earlier, and I wanted to get a new one as soon as possible. That's when one of the products caught my eye. Its price was pretty cheap. I thought it was pretty cheap. But at that point, I was still desperate. So I contacted the seller. We agreed to meet the same day. Everything seemed to be in order. However, half an hour before the appointment, he asked if he could reschedule the appointment a few hours later than originally planned. I agreed, but by then, it was already 5 o'clock in the evening, and I was a little annoyed because I was from the Midwest. It's winter there, it gets dark at 7 p.m. I told my parents I was going shopping and would be back in a little while. If I told my parents what happened, they wouldn't forgive me. I was a stupid teenager, even though I knew it was wrong to lie. Anyway, what can I say? In the midst of it all, I had an intuitive sense that something was wrong. It was about 8:30 p.m. at the time, so it was no surprise that it was dark outside. I live in a rural area, and honestly, I think that added to the creepiness. After running around for a while, I got a notification on my cell phone. It was a message from him. I don't remember his name, so from now on, I will call him George. The message said he wanted to meet me at my house, not the park we had talked about earlier. In that moment, I knew in my heart that something was wrong. I just really wanted peace. And I was already upset that he had postponed our meeting, so I didn't want to go home empty-handed and just leave. Going to his house that night was the biggest mistake of my life. When I got to his house, the mood was not good. I can't explain how I felt, but it was something I had never experienced as a stupid, naive 15-year-old girl. It went like this. I knocked on the door. The house was very old and dimly lit. Like I said, the house was in a rural area, and there weren't many other houses around. As I walked to the porch to knock on the door, I began to doubt myself, like whether I should turn back now. I don't know why, but I didn't turn back. I really regret not turning around. At this point, I'm not going to lie. I broke the brick. I lightly knocked on the door. He opened the door 4 times, almost immediately, introduced himself. It looked like he was expecting me. He asked if I wanted to come in, turn on the 4 appliances and make sure everything was in working order before I made my purchase. He said he would do that. I was quiet for a while. I started to say, no, thank you. I'm fine. He looked a little funny, like I hurt his feelings or something. I gave him the money, and he handed me all the goods and extras that were in the box. Games, controllers, and necessary records. He asked me if I needed to come in and see if everything was working before I left. He said my parents were outside, and that I would be in trouble if I didn't go home. He told me that I had to go home. After these words, his eyes darkened with anger. I was so angry that he immediately reached for my arm, grabbed me, and tried to drag me into the house. I quickly dodged him and ran screaming to my car. Even though I ran fast, I swear I had never run so fast in my life. I think it took me a long time to get to my car, because I had to run up the stairs and it was dark, so I had to be careful. I didn't fall down. He was an older man, relatively out of shape. I didn't think he was going to catch up with me, because that's what I thought just looking at him. On the way to the car, my heart was racing, and I thought I was going to have a heart attack. He yelled at me, called me names, and told me I was lucky to be alive. Otherwise, I would be in his basement right now, begging for the hope you deserve. When I got in the car, he said he only saw half of me. I drove away and never looked back. Now that I think about it, maybe his house really was abandoned. Either way, I don't know, and it doesn't matter. I'm just glad he's safe. I still dream about that nightmare a lot. I haven't told anyone about it until now, and I haven't wanted to talk about it since, especially to my parents, because they would kill me anyway. That night I learned a lesson I will never forget. Story 3. In the fall of 2018, I went to Southern California to help my sister move from one apartment to another after moving all of her belongings. I decided to stay for a few days to do some sightseeing and enjoy the nice weather. My sister's new apartment was bigger than her previous one, so she started looking for furniture on Craigslist. I joined her search and was able to find a cute little table that would fit perfectly in her new apartment. It seemed like a pretty good deal. I showed it to my sister and she really liked it. I contacted the seller and we arranged to meet the next day to buy the table. The seller turned out to be a man named Brian. He said he lived with his wife and seemed like a nice guy. It appeared from our communications that my sister needed to work the next day, so she gave me the money and I went to pick it up. To pick them up for her, I drove to Brian's house and arrived at 6:00 p.m., which was the time we met. He lived in a pretty nice neighborhood. The houses had a lot of character and we were pretty close to each other. Brian's house was at the end. He had tall bushes all around his yard like a fence. I thought it looked pretty cool, so I texted him that I was there. He said he had a table in the garage and I could just walk over and meet him there. I got out of the car and walked up to his driveway. The driveway was very unusual. It went down like a hill and curved around the corner to his garage, which was adjacent to the back of his house and was almost behind him. It was a 2-car garage and I saw that it was open. I went into the garage, but I didn't see Brian. It was a dimly lit garage. It looked pretty typical. There were paint containers on the sides, spare tires, and things like that. There were no cars in the garage, however. I saw a table standing next to the door leading to his house. I started to walk over to the door to knock on it for Brian. As I got to the door of the house, I heard the garage door close behind me. As soon as the doors closed, all the lights went out, the garage went completely black, and I couldn't see anything. I had a bad feeling. I went to the door and turned the knob, but it was locked. I texted Brian asking what was going on. The number was blocked. I knew I was in danger, and I had to get out of there. Using the flashlight on my phone, I looked around the garage and fumbled my way to the garage door. I tried to find the handle on it, but couldn't find it. I started banging on the door and kicking it. I hoped I could break it or one of the neighbors would hear the noise and come to the door to the house, which then swung open. I looked around and saw a man enter the garage. The house was dimly lit inside, so the garage wasn't lit at all, and I couldn't get a good look at the man. He closed the door behind him, and I could hear him walking slowly toward me. I shined my flashlight, but he was too far away for me to see him. I heard his footsteps walking along the edge of the garage. I looked around frantically and saw another door behind some wooden debris. I pushed them aside and even threw one in his direction. I don't think it hit him, because I heard them hit the floor, but I tried to open the door, and to my surprise it opened. I ran out as fast as I could and rushed down the driveway to my car. I got in my car and immediately called the police. When they arrived, I led them into the house. But Brian, or whatever his name was gone. I found out later that the house belonged to a man who was out of town, and someone had broken into it to put an ad on Craigslist. I don't know what could have happened to me in the garage. I'm just happy I got away.